Good morning, everyone. This is the first Sunday of the month, and we are back to the study of the book Action and Reaction. This chapter today is it's a very interesting chapter that it's kind of separated from the rest of the book, as it's a conversation with the minister Sanzio. But first, let me share what we saw last month, so you have an idea of where we are today. So on chapter 6, which is called In the Prayer Circle, starts with the tabernacle for prayer and spiritual communication and mention of peace, where we have mediums of materialization from the spiritual plane, a very interesting concept, right? So we have mediums there in the spiritual plane also, which are used sometimes as intermediaries for communications or materializations of high order spirits. And then Andre Luiz describes the materialization chamber, which is a translucent mirror, approximately 6 square meters in size, used for the materialization of superior spirits. Then Druso, the responsible for mention of peace, makes a prayer during a private meeting. And then Minister Sanzio materializes. He made use of the crystalline chamber as a condenser device for the ectoplasmic fluids provided by the mediums present. This is all in the spiritual world. And then what he did was an examination and ruling on cases being processed and mention of peace concerning 21 entities currently housed there. Minister Sanzio is from the Ministry of Regeneration, one of the 12 ministers who preside over the Minister of Regeneration in Solar, which is the first book. And then they did an examination of the case of Antonio Olimpio, who we are going to discuss more in depth in this book. Alzira, who was once the wife of Antonio Olimpio, is evoked by Sanzio and materializes during the meeting, offering to assist her former husband in his upcoming reincarnation. And the program outlined by Sanzio for resolving Antonio Olimpio's case, in which he must atone for the crime and the inherent fraud he committed against his brothers, Clarindo and Leonel. Okay, Elmo, you directed the study last month. Anything to add here that I missed?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so now we're going to start chapter 7, which is called An Invaluable Discussion. Okay, Zoraida, can you read for us?
Yes. An invaluable discussion. To make our task easier, Druso introduced us more familiarly to Minister Sanzio and informed him that we were studying the laws of causality by observing some problem cases at Mansal. Hoping to assess broader spheres of knowledge concerning destiny, we asked him about pain. For a few moments, the great messenger seemed to abdicate his elevated hierarchy status, evidenced by his distinctive personality, and as much through his look as though the inflection of his voice, he now seemed more closely like us and seemed more casual. Pain, yes, pain, he murmured compassionately, as if he were mulling over a transcendent issue in the corners of his soul. And looking at Hilario and me with unexpected tenderness, he emphasized almost sweetly, like you, I have been studying it too, my sons. I am a humble servant of abysses. I know firsthand the misery and wretchedness of many. I know brothers and sisters who have borne the stigma of horrendous suffering, animalized for centuries in the infernal precipices. However, in crossing the dense darkness, and even though the mystery of pain has torn at my heart, I've never seen a single individual that was forgotten by the divine goodness. As I listened to Sanzio's wise and loving words, an inexpressible sentiment came over my entire soul.
Until now, I had the opportunity to study with a good number of instructors. although only temporarily. From many of them, I had gleaned inspired lessons and observations.
Okay. But none had reached my mind with that mixture of rapture and caring, admiration and respect that was now emerging in my sentiments. As Sancio talked kindly, purplish silver scintillations hovered over his head, but it wasn't his outward dignity that fascinated me. It was a caressing magnetism that he was able to exteriorize. I had the impression that I was looking at my own father or mother, before whom I ought to be kneeling. Totally incapable of controlling my emotions, burning tears rolled down my face. I couldn't tell if Hilario felt as I did, because I could see nothing in front of me but Sancio and his humble greatness. Where, O Lord, I silently asked in the folds of my soul, had that illustrious and yet so humble soul come from? Where had I seen those beautiful, clear eyes before? Where had I once received the dew of his divine love, like a worm in a cave, feeling the blessing of a sun's warmth? The minister perceived what was going on inside me, like the teacher who perceives a student's confusion. And as if he wanted to urge me to take advantage of time, he remarked kindly, "My son, you can ask me anything non-personal in nature, and I will answer as best I can." I realized his noble intentions, and I tried to get a hold of myself. "Great benefactor," I exclaimed, striving to ignore my sentiments, "may we hear what you might have to say about karma?" Sancio assumed his customary stance by the crystalline screen and began. "Yes, karma, an ordinary expression among the Hindus, and which means action in Sanskrit, actually implies cause and effect, since every action or movement is a result of previous cause or stimuli. For us, it means the amount,
The account we must all pay, including our debits and credits. There are accounts of this kind, not only listing and defining individual persons, but also peoples and races, states and institutions."
The minister paused as if to perceive that the subject was complex and continued. In order to better understand karma, or the account of destiny created by us, we must remember that the governor of life also has a bookkeeping system that is expressed in the mechanics of inalienable justice. If in the circle of earthly activities, any organization needs to set up such a system in order to perform the tasks that are its responsibility, God's organization, which entails the whole universe, would not be able to function without order either. Because of this, the divine administration has knowledgeable departments for relating, persevering, commanding, and enriching cosmic life, with everything governed under the magnanimity of the broadest love and the fairest justice. In the sublime heavenly regions of each world that is dedicated to intelligence, reason, and the progress of God's children, shine the angelic genii responsible for efficiency, beauty, betterment, and ascension as of sublime endeavor, with suitable ministries in charge of loans and postponements, special credits, and extraordinary resources for all incarnate or discarnate spirits who deserve them because of their service to eternal good. And in the torment regions like this one, swept by cyclones of regenerative pain, we have the authority to promote charges in ordering, readjustment, and recovery of all those who made themselves multiple debtors to divine justice. Authority that purifies evolutionary pathways and restricts the manifestations of evil. Thus, earth religions were right when they located heaven in the higher realms and hell in the lower ones, because in the former is the increasing glory of the universe, whereas in the latter is the purgation and renewal necessary for life, so that it may purify itself and rise to the splendor of the heights.
Thanks, Zoraida. Okay, so you see that this chapter is a discussion with Sanzio, right? And that we were introduced to last month. And Andre Luiz describes how he feels in the presence of this more evolved spirit, this elevated spirit, right? He describes his emotions that he almost couldn't control, right? He talks about being there in awe in the presence of this evolved spirit. And he talks about that he's, the characteristic of a true missionary. We studied this recently, right? Is not never recognizing that you are a missionary, because they understand that we are all struggling spirits on our journey of evolution, and they accept their own limitations. And as he says, when he says here, I am a humble servant of the abysses, he's sincere, right? We know that many people, when they work, they pretend to be humble, but in reality, they feel some sense of mistaken pride in doing the work that they feel are noble work, right? But no, here Sanzio is really a humble servant, and that's how he describes himself. But when he talks about pain, one thing that we always say here, and he reaffirms, which is very important, I've never seen a single individual who was forgotten by the divine goodness. We are all a step away from receiving the help of superior spirits, of our guardian angels, our familiar spirits. We are the ones that block this connection. They are always available to us. So this is very important when we think about these evil spirits or these inferior spirits. They are always close to receiving the assistance they need if they open themselves. Andre Luiz describes how the impression that he thinks he ought to be kneeling, and he couldn't even look at Hilario because he couldn't see anything else in front of him but Sanzio and his humble greatness. Sanzio, of course, has the ability to read deep into Andre Luiz's thoughts, so he can see exactly what Andre Luiz is feeling. And to put him at ease, he tells him, you can ask me anything non-personal. Why non-personal? Because he was talking to a group of people. Doesn't make any sense for you to ask something personal from someone so elevated for a group that you have your own problems that you have to deal personally, not in front of a group. In front of a group, the more important discussions are general discussions that will help everyone learn, understand, and grow. That's why they're not personal here. So Andre Luiz asks about karma, which is the action and reaction in Sanskrit, right? He explains that it's an expression amongst the Hindus, which means action in Sanskrit, but actually implies cause and effect, action and reaction, which is the name of this book. Every action or movement is the result of a previous cause or stimuli, right? So Sanzio mentions, which is very important, there are accounts of this kind not only listing and defining individual persons, but also peoples, races, states, and institutions. So the notion of action and reaction applies to us individually, yes, but then it goes beyond us to our groups, our races, our countries, our collectivities. Everything has karma and action and reaction. Many times when we talk about these catastrophes that kill many people, this can be, again, can be, doesn't necessarily means it is, collective karma, having the case of having the action and reaction. One of the most famous examples that we we have in the literature of Chico Xavier is the case of the circus that caught fire in Brazil in the 1950s or 60s, I don't remember exactly, that killed more like 200 people or 300 people or 100 people, I don't remember exactly the number. And Chico was asked about, Emmanuel was asked about this event, and he answered this was a collective karma. All those individuals were together in the Roman circus, in killing and burning people in the Roman circus. So the opportunity of their paying their debts was that the collective karma. So this is just to exemplify, which is the action and reaction. The karma can be individual, can be collective. But at the end, it's always individual responsibilities. Every action that we are taking creates a reaction. And then he talks about the governor of life, that God that has a bookkeeping system and the inalienable justice, right? And he explains, so if in the circle of earthly activities, any organizations need a system, we all need a system in order to perform tasks, and every good organization has an efficient system. Of course, it has to come from God's organization, which entails the whole universe, and wouldn't be able to function without this organization, right? So he said that divine administration had departments for relating, preserving, commanding, and enriching cosmic life. So in each world, each region of each world dedicated to intelligent reason and the progress of God's children, there is an angelic genii responsible for the efficiency, beauty, betterment, and ascension of the sublime endeavor. So he's explaining that there are ministers in charge of loans and postponements. What are loans and postponements? It's individual cases. We receive an extra opportunity for repair the mistakes we made alone. Postponements. We postpone the karmas that we have to face because we are supposed to face something, but because of such a good work that we are doing, and this something is going to cause difficulties for our journey, so we have a postponement. Special credits, extraordinary resources, individual issues that affects our daily lives. And for both incarnate and discarnate spirits that deserve them because of their service to eternal good. Every time we're doing a service, a good service for the eternal good, we may receive all the credits necessary for us to continue doing our work. Now, in tormented regions like the one they are, swept by regenerative pain, we, meaning him and all the responsible for the regions, have the authority to promote charges and auditing, readjustment and recovery of all those who made themselves multiple debtors of divine justice. So each case is analyzed by them, and they can readjust their journey and help on their recovery. This is the authority that purifies pathways and restricts the manifestation of evil. Yes, sometimes, many times we ask, why is God allowing this to happen? Well, again, things follow the natural law, but these spirits, they have the authority to restrict the manifestations of evil when necessary. If evil is manifesting itself, it's because it is part of the process of regeneration of the group involved, the person, the group, everyone. So finally, he talks about how right was earth religions when we talk about heaven in the higher realms and hell in the lower ones, because it makes sense that, when we think about elevated spirits, we think about elevating, and we talk about the lower zones, lower in the lower parts of the planet, right? The purgation and renewal necessary for life, so it may purify itself and rise to the splendor of the heights. Elmo, any additions here?
Not much. I think when he says there are no brothers and sisters who have borne the stigma of horrendous suffering, he's telling us here this stigma is what we create for ourselves. That pain is something that we create. And it's really limited to lower worlds or more underdeveloped, morally speaking, world, because it says that animalized for centuries in the infernal precipice. So that's really limited for those who are still very materialized. The word animalized here you can translate to still very purely spiritualized in the infernal precipice. So why does God allow it, as you asked? Because we have free will and we can choose what we're going to create. We can born the stigma of horrendous suffering or not. That's a choice. So God allows. The choices we make. And it's interesting when he defines the karma as the account we must pay, including our debits and credits. So again, it's very important that we see karma here not only as the bad stuff, because we may get credits also. And divine justice is extremely tolerant with our debits and very good with our credit. They pay very high interest for the goodness that we do. Otherwise, it would be very hard for us to live some of our situations because our debit will be so much greater than our credits. And there is tremendous amount of benevolence in this justice, right? Because if it's pure justice without the benevolence, then it's an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, right? But when we add the benevolence, the mercy of God to it, then it becomes a true divine justice. And as Emmanuel says, then a tooth for a tooth, an eye for an eye, is only limited for those who absolutely continue to reject the opportunities of growth, the help being extended to those. And as you said there, then the higher spirit has authority to act, to put what we say, a certain limitation on our free will, wants to protect ourselves. And to protect those around us who will suffer secondary to our personal injustices. So I think it's very interesting, this definition of karma that extends beyond only the negative, because you usually think of karma as something bad, right? But he says over here, debits and credits. I think that's very important for us to mention.
I believe the Hindus have a word for that, right? It's dharma. Karma is for the consequence of bad actions, and dharma is the consequence for good actions, I believe, but I'm not 100% sure.
Okay. So here the science is put both things together, right?
Yes. Well, because we use karma, right? And I think karma is very well known, and most people understand the concept of karma. And dharma is the less known, but I believe, and if someone else knows better than me, please let me know. But I believe they use dharma for the credits.
Okay.
Yeah, João, you are right.
Okay.
Yeah, Dharma is for the good things.
Okay, thanks, Luiz. Okay, anyone else? Okay, Zoraida, let's go.
Okay, yes. During a sudden pause, I could see that the minister was willing to continue his conversation with us, and so I added, "It's exciting to know that divine providence is perfect magnanimity and is limitless as it generates treasure stores of love to be distributed abundantly to all God's creatures. In addition, it is vigilant equity in the management and application of the universe's assets."
In fact, it could not be otherwise, said Sanzio kindly. When it comes to the law of cause and effect, it is essential not to forget that everything in life, from the remotest constellations to the tiniest subatomic particles, belong to God,
whose unfathomable designs can change, renew, destroy, or rebuild everything that has been made. Hence, we are simply uses of nature, which manifests the Lord's treasures, and we are responsible for all our actions as soon as we possess a little discernment. A spirit, wherever it may be, whether incarnate or discarnate on earth or in other worlds, in fact, spends something that doesn't belong to it, as it receives as loans from the Eternal Father the resources it uses to effectuate its own sublimation in knowledge and virtue. Material patrimonies and riches of intelligence, time and form, affections and horrific titles of any origin whatsoever are the property of the All-Merciful, who grants them to us temporarily so that we can use them for our own spiritual growth as we progress on the wide roads of experience in order to finally possess the eternal values synthesized in love and in wisdom, and make use of them in the distant future to mirror his sovereign glory from the electron to the astronomical giants on the cosmic canvas. Everything comprises stores of God's energies, which we use for our own benefit with his permission in order to work seriously on raising ourselves to his sublime majesty. Consequently, it is easy to understand that after we have won the crown of reason, we have to give an accounting at the right time, for there is no progress without justice in the appraisal of our character. I distinctly remembered our erroneous concept of life on earth, where we are always ready to take undue possession of the resources of the human experience, land and houses, titles and favors, prerogatives and affections, to drag around the shackles of the grossest selfishness. Sanzio read my mind because after a short pause, he emphasized with a fatherly smile, "It is true that in the world, the intelligent person knows good and well that any concept of exclusive ownership is no more than pure presumption. Yes, as a loan, everything in life is awarded by divine providence for a period of time, since death acts as an implacable judge, transferring assets from some hands to others and recording with unequaled exactitude how each spirit uses all the advantages and concessions that were given to it by the agents of divine goodness. In this example,
we can see the principles of cause and effect in full manifestation, because in the use or misuse of the reserves of life that represents God's eternal ownership, each soul creates
in its own conscience the credits and debits that will eventually bring it joy and pain, ease or difficulty along the way. The more knowledge we have, the more we are responsible for what we do. Through our thoughts, words, and actions, which invariably flow from the heart, we constantly spend and transform the Lord's energies during our evolutionary journey in the sectors of life, and from the equality of our intentions and applications, our sentiments and practical actions along the way, life organizes with us our agreeable or disagreeable account in life of the Lords of destiny. At this point of the invaluable explanation, Hilario asks humbly, dear instructor, in light of the seriousness of this lesson, what should we do? What should we understand by good and evil? Xavier made a gesture of kind tolerance and answered, let's avoid diving into mazes of philosophy despite the respect it deserves, since we are not merely sparing with words. Above all, we must try to simplify things. It is easy to recognize good when our heart willingly nourishes itself before the law. The good, my friend, is progress and happiness, safety and justice for all human beings and for all the creatures we meet on the road, and to whom we must dedicate ourselves exclusively, but without any coercion on the part of purely human rules, which will put us in false position as regards service, since they will work from the outside inward, very often causing disorder and rebelliousness in our interior cosmos to our harm. Thus, the good is our willing cooperation with the law on behalf of all, even if it means we have to renounce ourselves completely. We cannot ignore the fact that by helping the law of the Lord and acting according to it, we ourselves will be helped and sustained with the field of imperishable values. And evil will always be represented by that sad tendency of keeping the good exclusively to ourselves, expressed in selfishness and vanity, intensity and pride, which portray the inferior lines of the spirit. After a short pause, the minister added, our Lord Jesus Christ is the paradigm of the eternal good on earth, having given himself completely for the benefit of others. He didn't hesitate to accept the
supreme sacrifice on behalf of all, so that good for all could prevail, even though only incomprehension and suffering, flagellation and death were reserved for him first. Thanks for that.
Okay.
So here, Xavier continues. Andre Luiz talks a little bit about the cause and effect, our life on Earth, and he talks about Xavier talks about the law of cause and effect, that everything is directly connected to God, or everything belongs to God. It belongs to God in the sense that everything is God's creation. So everything follows God's natural law and follows God's directions, right? So everything belongs to God. We are simply users of everything, right? But it's interesting when he says that we are responsible for all our actions as soon as we possess a little discernment. Reflecting on what we are studying Thursdays, that we just started the three kingdoms, and we talked about plants. We are going to talk about animals next Thursday. There is no karma for plants or animals because there is no discernment, there is no free will. They act, animals especially, on instinct, so they don't create karma for themselves. Karma is only when we start to develop our free will and we start making our choices, and then we start creating consequences. But again, according to our level of evolution, the more we know, the more responsible we are, as we're going to see a little later here in this chapter. So it continues talking about everything belongs to God, from the electron to the astronomical giants. Everything comprises stores of God's energies, and we use for our own benefit. And then he talks about we use everything in our life as a loan for a period of time, since then here in the physical life, death comes for everybody, and it transfers assets, physical, material assets, from some hands to others, and we just carry with us our moral and intellectual progress, not anything that we acquired materially, right? He talks about the cause and effect in full manifestation, meaning each soul creates in its own conscience the credits and debits that will inevitably bring it joy or pain, ease or difficulty along the way. We create our own path, and our conscience is what's judging us at all times. So the more knowledge we have, the more responsible we are, and through our words and actions, we constantly expand and transform the Lord's energies during our evolutionary journey. So we are always organizing within us our agreeable or disagreeable account in the light of laws of destiny. Meaning, every time we deviate from the natural law, we create consequences for us. Every time we work with the divine law, we create rewards, in a sense. We make our journey easier. Then Hilario asks about good and evil, which is very interesting, right? And Sanzio say first, let's not dive into philosophy here, despite the reserve it deserves. But good is our willing cooperation with the law on behalf of all, not on behalf of ourselves, on behalf of all. Every time we are working to the benefit of others, we are working to the benefit of ourselves, even if it means we have to renounce ourselves completely. So if we have to renounce ourselves completely, the more merit we have. We, by accepting the task and trying to help and assist others, will be helped and sustained by the natural law. And evil will always be represented by the sad tendency of keeping the good exclusively to ourselves, expressed in selfishness and vanity, insensitivity and pride, which are the inferior lines of the spirit. Every time we work only for our own benefit, we are causing harm to ourselves, because we are not thinking about others. Of course, again, this is not black and white. We have to understand that there are many variations here, right? Because sometimes even when we are only thinking about ourselves, we may do some things to benefit others that will come as in our list of rewards. So sometimes even when we are working for the benefit of others, we are doing it for selfish reasons, and that also will count against us on our eternal journey. So from those extremes, you see everything that can happen in the middle. And again, it's important to remember, most of us, we are in the middle, right? We do a lot of things for our own selfishness and act with insensitivity and pride. But every time we're trying to help our loved ones, the neighbors, or working in a place to help and assist others, we are working to the benefit of this divine law that follows us, right? And then he ends up by comparing the life of Jesus here, that he gave completely himself to the benefit of others, as a perfect spirit will do, right? And he accepted the supreme sacrifice on behalf of all, so that good of all could prevail. He suffered incomprehension, suffering, flagellation, and death as examples for us to follow, to give us the example of what we should do. And we are discussing the lessons of Jesus more in depth in the book Jesus at Home, which we're doing on the second Sunday of the month. So we're talking more about Jesus there. Anything here to any remarks?
No, João.
Any questions, comments here? Okay, let's continue, Soraya.
Okay. In view of a momentary pause and because of my eagerness to understand, I dared ask, kind friend, could you tell us something about the karmic indications we bring with us? Xavier thought for a few moments and said, it is very difficult to grasp the meaning of the divine laws using the limited resources of human language. Nonetheless, I shall try to by restoring to images that are as simple as possible. In spite of the inaccuracy, we may compare the human spheres to the vegetable kingdom. Each plant produces at the right time according to its species, and each soul establishes the fortunate or unfortunate circumstances in which it finds itself according to its actions and through its sentiments, ideas, and decisions during its evolutionary pilgrimage. At first, the plant is contained within the seed, and at the first of each new existence, the soul's destiny is contained within the mind. Given time, the plant sprouts, grows, and blossoms, and produces fruit, and given time, the soul also sprouts beneath the sun of eternity, grows in knowledge and virtue, blossoms in beauty and understanding, and produces the fruit of love and wisdom. However, a plant is a chrysalis of conscience that sleeps for long millennia, rigidly held to the principles of ordinary genetics that determine the traits it has inherited from its forebears, whereas the human soul is already formed conscience and portrays within itself the laws that govern life, and it therefore possesses, as to a certain extent, faculties with which to influence genetics and thus modify its structure, because the responsible conscience always inherits traits from its own self, adjusted to all the consciences that are in tune with it. Our mind preserves in seed form all the pleasant and unpleasant incidents that will come back to it tomorrow, just as the tiny seed potentially contains within itself the productive plant that it will become in the future. At this point, a troubled Hilario asked, doesn't what you have said condone complete determinism? If right now our minds contain everything that is going to happen to us tomorrow.
But Sanjo explained patiently.
Yes, in the earliest stages of evolution, determinism may be viewed as being irresistible. The mineral obeys the invaluable laws of cohesion, and vegetable responds faithfully to organic principles. But in the human consciousness, reason and free will, knowledge and discernment affect the forces of destiny, confirming on the spirit the natural responsibility it must possess doing itself. For that reason, although we realize that we are subordinate to the effects of our own actions, we cannot forget that each one of us within this relative determinism is a result of our own conduct, which may mean quick liberation or a longer, increased or lessened imprisonment in our condition as souls in debt to the law. And even in the worst possible expiatory situations, I asked, doesn't the conscience enjoy the rights inherited to free will? And why not? Stated the minister kindly. Let's imagine a monstrous criminal who has been segregated in a prison, accused of many crimes. He has been deprived of any of the freedom he would experience in an ordinary cell. Even in this condition, if he were to use his time in prison to willingly work for the well-being of the authorities and his fellow inmates, accepting with humility and respect the decisions of the law that is used to correct him, such attitude being the result of his free will to help or harm himself. In short time, this prisoner will begin to attract the sympathy of those around him, thus advancing surely to self-regeneration.
Thanks, Sarada. So, again, nothing happens by chance, right? So we are studying the three kingdoms. We just studied plants on this last Thursday. And we talked about plants have, what they have is mechanical. They're learning the autonomic functions, right? And he's talking here at comparing the plants to our evolution, right? Each plant produces it at the right time according to a species, and the plant is contained at first within the seed, and the first of of each new existence, the soul's destiny is contained within the mind, meaning the spirit reincarnating brings everything with him in the mind, right? And then the plant grows, blossoms, produces fruit, and the soul also sprouts beneath the sun of eternity, grows in knowledge and virtue. But a plant is a chrysalis of conscience, meaning it has the seeds of future conscience. It's a spiritual principle going through it. It's not a spirit yet, right? It sleeps for long millennia, right? So it follows the principle of ordinary genetics, whereas the human soul is already formed conscience that portrays within themselves the natural laws, the laws that govern life. So it possesses the faculties to influence genetics and thus modify its structure. The plant cannot modify itself. The humans can modify themselves within limitations, of course, but we can influence genetics, and we're still learning about it. What is important to understand here, our mind preserves in seed form all the pleasant and unpleasant incidents that will come back to it tomorrow, just as the tiny seed potentially contains within itself the productive plant that will become in the future. Everything is printed in our conscience, all our actions, everything that we have done throughout all our incarnations, the experiences we have learned through the mineral, vegetable, and animal phases, right, as a spiritual principle that we are studying on Thursdays. Everything is registered and printed in our mind or our conscience that will serve as on our evolutionary journey. And then Hilario asked, very, very interesting, right? Wow, but what you're talking about doesn't really condone determinism, complete determinism. If right now our mind contains everything that is going to happen to us, but then Sanzio explained, yes, in the early stages of evolution, determinism may be viewed as being irresistible. So again, going back to what we were studying on Thursday, the mineral based the invariable laws of cohesion, and the vegetable responds faithfully to organogenetic principles. But in the human consciousness, we have reason and free will. Knowledge and discernment affect the forces of destiny, conferring to the spirit the natural responsibilities it must possess regarding itself. Again, in our physical body, we have the autonomic, we have the aggregation, and this aggregation we learn as spiritual principle from the minerals. The autonomic functions we learn through the evolution in the vegetable kingdom, and the instinct that we learn through our evolution through the animal kingdom, and the intelligence that starts developing there, very primitive intelligence, and now as humans, the more developed intelligence. And then Andre Luiz asks about the free will, the rights inherent in free will, and Sanzio gives a very good example, right? Someone that is being condemned for a criminal that is in prison, not even in an ordinary cell, in isolation, because of he or she cannot stay in an ordinary cell. Even in this extreme condition, if he or she were to use his or her time in prison to willingly work for the well-being of himself or herself and fellow inmates, accepting with humility and respect the decisions that were used to correct him, this attitude will, being the result of free will help or harm himself or herself. In a short time, a prisoner will begin to attract the sympathy of those about him. Really, our free will allows these good or bad consequences for ourselves. So not everyone is capable of redemption. It's difficult, yes, but it is not impossible. And many times when we talk about the case against death penalty, is the opportunity of these evil spirits that are committed to evil to have time in isolation to find ways to regenerate themselves. Many times it works. If you use the death penalty, you're just sending them back to the spiritual world where they can continue to be exactly what they are and probably dominating or being dominated by other spirits. Okay? Very interesting, Elmo, right? When we connect the Thursdays and the Sundays together.
Yes, it's amazing, but even take at the level of the individualized intelligent principle already, the spirit itself, in the process of making better use of our intelligence and of our free will and of our conscience. It seems to me that he's telling to us here that we experience for some time a tremendous difficulty to retrieve into our conscience, because there we have the divine laws, and make our decisions based on those divine laws imprinted in our conscience. And that's what keeps us in this animalized situation, materialized situation that he spoke to us in the beginning. The issue of determinism versus free will is very complicated because to me it's not one or another, it's one with the other. It's determinism with free will. If we believe Jesus when he says to each in accordance to its work, if you believe when he says, if you kill by the sword, you die by the sword, of course, is a metaphoric statement saying that there is a law of cause and consequence. There is a degree of determinism in it. But even that degree of determinism can be used as a tool of progress and regeneration, as a great example used by sons regarding this man who was condemned because of his crimes. It was a term that, would lose his free will, at least at the level of human being live on earth, being in jail, because of his actions. So action and reaction, cause and consequence. But in the same sense, it was a gift to that criminal, for now he has the time to not only prevent him to continue committing crimes out there, but to reflect on what he is doing with his time on earth. That is free will. And even if he cannot leave the prison, has to complete his sentence, he can start the process of reparation right then and there. That is free will. So they work conjointly, and the determination is really limited for the more animalized beings that we are right now, that have tremendous difficulty of using our conscience in our decision making. If you retrieve to our conscience, and for me personally, I think for spiritual, since we are Christians, reflect on the teachings of Jesus, how should I act here? How Jesus would act in this situation? That to me is the means for us now to retrieve into our conscience before making decisions, before we act, and then exercise our free will and our intelligence in accordance to those divine laws imprinted in our conscience. And we all have that. It's not limited to spiritists, it's not limited to Christians, to anyone. God is just. Every single being has that. But I think in the very beginning of our existence, we find it very difficult to retrieve into our conscience before you make a decisions, because we are very tempted to the material world. That's why the sons use the word animalized very often.
Thanks, Alan. Any other questions, comments? Okay, let's go, Zoraida.
The reasoning was clear, but now wanting to lose the threat of such a simple but invaluable lesson, I asked, Venerable benefactor, could you tell us what the best way would be to collaborate with the divine law for our spiritual development? Mightn't there be a way to escape justice? Xavier smiled and remarked, no one can escape divine justice, especially since our conscience, as it awakens to the sanctity of life, yearns to rightly pay all the debts that it has acquired regarding God's goodness. However, the infinite love of the Heavenly Father shines on all processes of readjustment. Consequently, if we fail at this or that crucial experience needed to acquire the light that the Supreme Lord has reserved for us,
we must adapt ourselves to the just recapitulation of our frustrated experiences by using the patrimony of time. Let's imagine, for example, a 40-year-old man who has turned coward in light of life's struggles and thus commits suicide.
Yes. This man enters the spirit world suffering the immediate consequences of his unfortunate act, and depending on the attenuating or aggravating reasons for his desertion, he will have to spend a long or lesser time recomposing the cells of his perished spirit. When the time finally comes for him to deserve the reward of a new physical body, among the trials he will have to go through will be the overwhelming temptation to commit suicide again at the exact age in which he forsook his responsibility the previous time. This is so because the destructive images he has stored in his mind will surface through a phenomenon we may call reflex circumstances. These reflex circumstances give rise to deep emotional balances that will, of course, put them in contact with the unbalancing forces that are in tune with his temporary way of being. If this man has not saved up renewing and educational resources through learning and the practice of fraternity so as to overcome the inevitable crisis, it will be very hard for him to avoid committing suicide again, because despite being reinforced from the outside, temptations have their starting point within us and they feed on what is already there. This explanation was invaluable, and so I asked again with the respectful curiosity of a student interested in learning, how can people prepare themselves properly to pay the price of their freedom? Xavier did not hesitate and promptly replied, like all debtors who work to pay off their commitments, of course, those who have a lot of debt must accept restrictions on their comfort so that they can cleanse their debts by saving money to do so. Consequently, they cannot live like spendthrifts, but must live with abstinence and sweat in order to free themselves from such a repressive existence as soon as possible. The kindly instructor paused briefly as if he needed to reflect and continued. Let's go back to the symbol of the plant. Let's imagine that an orange seed has fallen on unfertile, dry soil. According to the laws that govern agricultural activities, it will germinate amidst constraining obstacles and will become a withered bush that is only capable of a sorry production when the time comes. But if the orchard keeper sees to its needs and demands as it begins a struggle by fertilizing, watering,
and protecting it, as well as pruning it at the right time, the orange tree will respond wonderfully to its fate. Such attention, however, must be given at just the right time.
That is when the soul is incarnate, insofar as possible. It must begin this renewal during the most appropriate moments of the physical journey. Hilario had been following the lesson and was as fascinated as I was by the logic of those wise and simple words. He asked, but what happens when people in childhood and adolescence cannot count on teachers who are dedicated to the good and who are capable of acting as diligent orchard keepers for those who are returning to the human struggle? Of course, said the minister, childhood and adolescence are the most appropriate times for incarnate souls to build a more fortress with which they must gradually weave the crown of victory they must attain. Nevertheless, it is crucial to understand that for the conscious spirit, The will itself symbolizes the orchard keeper, and the fertilizing, watering, and pruning represent the incessant work to which we must dedicate our will in the recomposing of our destinies. In light of this, every minute in life is important for our renewal, redemption, growth, and purification. We can understand that the storm, as a symbol of crisis, will strike everyone at a particular moment. But those who can count on a safe harbor will overcome the danger with fearlessness and courage.
Thanks. So here, Andre Luiz asks if there is a way to escape justice, and Sanzio replies that no one can escape divine justice, because our conscience, as it awakens to the sanctity of life, yearns to rightly pay all the debts that he has acquired regarding God's goodness. What he means here is everything is stored in our conscience. Of course, the more we evolve, the more we become aware of our responsibilities, and the more we become troubled by what is our past actions have caused to others, the pain and the suffering that has caused to others. So we are going to want to readjust with our past debt. So there is no way to escape divine justice. There is a way, and many people are postponing the readjustment, avoiding facing their own consciences, and that can drag for some time, but not for eternity. Eventually, we will have to face the consequences, not because it's imposed to us, but because we ourselves, on our evolutionary journey, our conscience will ask us to readjust and to repair the mistakes we made. And then he goes to explain, right? He gives the example of a 40-year-old man who commits suicide, that he has to spend a long or lesser time recomposing the cells of the perispirit. When you commit this act, you damage your spiritual body, your perispirit, and you have to recompose it. But the scars are going to be there and are going to be registered in the conscience. So when he comes to a new physical body, the trial or that is the challenges that you have to overcome is the temptation to commit suicide again around at the same exact age. And that's, we hear many cases of serial suicides, right? People that have committed suicide in many lives. Ivone Pereira, the famous Brazilian spiritist author that wrote the memoirs of a suicide through Camilo Castelo Branco, she talks in one of her books of her being a suicide in many incarnations. This is as he explained here, this is because the destructive images we store in our mind will surface through a phenomenon we call reflex circumstances. That is what is imprinted in our conscience. We will come up again as we have to overcome these tendencies, these challenges, to be able to repair what we have done to ourselves. So many times these people will commit suicide again, because despite being reinforced from the outside, temptations have their starting point within us, in our conscience, and they feed on what is already there. That's very important, right? Nothing, when we talk about obsessions, we talk about spiritual influences. Spirits are not going to impose things that are not already on us. So if you're not a smoker, no spirit can force you to smoke, because it's not you. But if you are a smoker that quit, then it's already there, the temptation, and the spirits will use it. these temptations to try to force us to go back to our wrong inclinations. So they will act on the inclinations that are already there. If they're not there, there's nothing for them to work with. And then Andre Luiz asks, how can we prepare ourselves to deal with this price of this freedom? And Sanju asks, we must accept restrictions so that we can cleanse our debts. Like, we cannot live like spendthrifts if you spend too much money in previous existences, meaning in comparison. The free will be restricted to benefit us, not to constrain us from doing what we want, but to prevent us from doing the mistakes again. So again, we have free will, but the external help and assistance will be to constrain our free will to prevent ourselves from committing the same mistakes. And then he compares to a plant, right? A seed that goes in unfertile, dry soil, that a keeper needs to use it, to take care of it. And he says that on us, the will itself symbolizes the orchard keeper. And the fertilizing, watering, and pruning represent the incessant work to which we must dedicate our will in the recomposing of our destinies. This comes on a question that Hilario asked about childhood and adolescence that cannot count on teachers, that cannot count on good guidance. We know of many cases of people that were brought up in very difficult conditions in Brazil, in the slums, and they end up succeeding in life, right? Because they used their own will and their own energy for the good, to symbolize, to use their own courage to overcome the difficulties and do what they need to do, in terms of progress. Okay, have anything here?
No.
Okay, any questions, comments here?
Yeah.
Okay, Soraya, let's continue.
Yes. The explanation pierced our minds like sunbeams penetrating a dark cubicle. My colleague, however, raised another question. Action by action, we also have a lot of work to do after the death of the body, since we commit wrongs while incarnate, and thus oftentimes suffer their consequences here. Do we have to suffer while incarnate for the deplorable actions we commit here? Absolutely, confirmed Samsiel kindly. Our actions against the divine law, which is invariable, the good for everyone, may be corrected wherever we are. So there are expiations both on the earth and in heaven. Many discarnates flounder in the unruly passions that border on crime, especially obsession, despite being warned by their own conscience and the wise advice of benevolent instructors. They create for themselves heavy, afflictive debts toward life, and paying them off demands struggle and sacrifice for a long, long time. Speaking of which, we must remember
that in most cases, our efforts at readjustment in the spirit life, our efforts at readjustment begins in spirit life before reincarnation mitigate our situation, guaranteeing us a childhood and adolescence full of hope and peace.
In preparation for the recapitulations of adulthood, except, of course, for issues requiring difficult immediate expiation. When the soul is compelled to endure profound suffering, quite often while still in the maternal womb, as well as the disappointments, illnesses, humiliations, and pains of old age, or of protracted diseases before the grave. These various pains, anguishes, and sufferings lessen our accounts as debtor spirits, granting us a blessed truce at the beginning of our stay in the spirit realm, right after our pilgrim through the physical arena. When they reach old age, most incarnates usually dedicate the last phases of their lives to meditate and reflection, serenity and tenderness. Childish minds, even in the waning of their physical strength, continue to be thoughtless and irresponsible, but minds that have matured in knowledge intuitively make use of old age or pain to think more securely, whether by devoting themselves to the faith in religious temples, thereby enjoying a broader inner balance, or by devoting themselves to charity, by which they dilute their less than desirable memories, thus preparing with praiseworthy judgment and admirable wisdom of the inevitable trip to the greater life. I concluded from Druso's look that our discussion was about to end, but I risked one last question. My dear minister, understanding that there are debts that, because of their nature and extent, demand from us several lifetimes to pay off, how can we evaluate them from the memory point of view? I, for instance, feel that I still have enormous past debts to pay, although I cannot remember them at the moment. Yes, he explained. The problem is time. To the degree that we linger here in our perispirit faithfully, fulfilling our obligations before the law, the more of our power of memory will be enhanced. By growing in lucidity, we can encompass broader rims of memory. This is why, after many years of serving in earth spirit regions, we voluntarily assess our less happy memories, thus identifying more intentions of our karma or our account. Although we may be grateful for the benevolence of the instructors and friends who forgive our unworthy past, we are never lenient toward our own weaknesses. And that is why we are compelled to ask the higher authorities for another difficult but invaluable reincarnation.
That can help in our re-education or bring us closer to the redemption we need. Understand?
Yes, we did. Chancellor looked at the director as if to tell him our time was up, and Druso told us that we shouldn't detain the helpful, generous instructor by any longer. We thanked him humbly by the lessons. The minister returned to the brightly lit screen where the fog began once more to get denser, finally hiding the venerable figure of our sight. After a few minutes, the room returned to its normal appearance, and Druso's moving prayer ended the unforgettable meeting.
Thanks. Okay, so this last part here, Sanzio talks about, Andre Luiz asks about, how can we, see if we have to suffer both incarnated and discarnated for the acts we commit here. And Sanzio says the divine law is invariable, the good for everyone. Again, the good is following the divine law and practicing good for the benefit of everyone. And it may be corrected wherever you are. So expiations happen both on earth and in heaven. Again, we talk about expiations happening here on when we are incarnated, but no, Sanzio makes it clear that happens both on earth and in heaven. That many discarnates flounder in unruly passions that border on crime, especially obsession, despite having being warned by their own conscience and the advice from benevolent instructors. So discarnates create afflictive debts towards life, and paying off them demands struggle and sacrifice. But he says that our efforts in readjustment in the spirit life before reincarnation can mitigate our situation, guaranteeing us a childhood and adolescence full of hope and peace. Except, of course, issues requiring difficult and immediate expiation when the soul is compelled to endure profound suffering, which are the cases of suffering that we see in children and adolescents, right? But in most of the cases, we have a childhood and adolescence full of hope and peace. The spiritual influences begin when we reach teenage years and later. And then he talks about old age, right? When incarnates usually dedicate the last phases of their life for meditation, reflection, and but with the exception of childish minds, right? Even in the waning of their physical strength, continue to be thoughtless and irresponsible. But the minds that have maturing knowledge make good use of their old age to devote themselves to different things, enjoying a broader inner balance, and or by devoting themselves to charity, dilute their less than desirable memories, thus preparing for the inevitable trip back to the spiritual world or to the greater one. And then Andre Luiz, finally, he asks about the memory, right? If he doesn't remember what he has to readjust, how he can do, which is a question that is generally asked, right? We asked a lot about that when we are incarnate, and even when we are discarnate, we don't really remember, fully remember our past, because we will remember them as needed for our readjustments. And he explains that the problem is time, that the time we spend there in the spiritual world fulfilling our obligations, the more our power of memory will be enhanced. By growing lucidity, we can broaden the realms of memory. And he says, so after many years of serving on Earth's spirit region, we voluntarily access our less happy memories, thus identify more extensions of our karma. Meaning, the more time we spend in the spiritual world doing work of goodness, and the more we'll be able to access our memories, because then we are ready to deal with what comes from our less happy memories, right? You are going to access your memories when they are of use to you, not to create more traumas and more difficulties. So that's the important thing here in terms of our accessing our memories, right? So that's it for the chapter. I don't think there's anything like more here. The Sanzu returned to the bright screen. The fog began to get denser, and finally he disappeared, and the room returned to normal. And there was a prayer to end. Okay, Elmo, anything here to add?
Yeah, I'm glad that Sanzu cut the chapter right there and there, because this chapter is so dense in so many teachings, and it goes into depth of all of basically philosophical questions that we have now. What are we doing here? What's the meaning of life? What is good? What's evil? Determinism versus free will. It's so many aspects of the philosophy, and he says that let's take philosophy aside as important, it's good, but let's be more objective and obvious. So he speaks of all those things without much philosophy at all, and leave things, I'm not going to say clear, because I think I myself going to have to read this chapter a couple of times to extract so much information that it's in here. But again, the things that are complex, in nature, they are complex. You can't simplify them. You know, if the topic is of a complex nature, it is the nature of the topic. And if you try to simplify, we may distort, we may bring falsehoods. So if it's hard, it's hard. And I think this chapter is very complex, it's very dense. It requires us to meditate paragraph by paragraph, and I hope everyone you read it again, because I think it encompasses if not all, most of the Spiritist doctrine. I find it interesting when he reassured to us that we learn everywhere. The cause, the law of cause and reaction is everywhere, incarnate or discarnate. But the process of progressing, it happens at our level as spirits, during reincarnation, the time that we're in the physical body. You know, we must begin I will renew it during most appropriate moments of the physical journey. And then he assures later on that now, learning, we learn everywhere. We have always been exposed to the laws of action and reaction, and everything that we do in the spiritual world or don't do in the spiritual world will have this reaction in the next reincarnation as well, right? So that's I find extremely important. The definition of good and evil, and I'll go back to Emmanuel, is exactly what Sansa says here. What is good? Good is good health, it's good education, it's good housing, it's good comfort for everyone. And what is evil? It's all those things for oneself. So evil is selfishness and pride, period. And he takes away all the books of great discussion philosophy and leave things very open for everyone to figure out. But I think it's a very dense, wonderful chapter that I think we all should spend more time reading it and try to extract as much as we can out of it. Because in this discussion, the best that we can do does not make justice to so much lessons we have here.
Yeah,
So
when I was studying this chapter, I was thinking exactly that. Man, how that's so much here that I think I don't know if we can do it in one class. Ebony.
Hi, it's interesting, Elmo, that you mentioned how important it is to review the chapter again, because there's so many complex issues that came up, and without realizing it, this chapter has actually helped me to sit back. Well, I intentionally said to myself, as we were talking about, as the minister was talking about the effects of suicide and how, we need time, as suicide need time to recompose their perispiritual cells. And I intentionally made the plan to, after this chapter, to sit down and value life some more, reflect on how important an incarnation is, because there's so much that we don't think about that goes into the planning of an incarnation. And if it's cut short by suicide, for example, just how devastating it is. So suicide was one of the topics that you forgot to mention, Elmo, in the amount of issues that came up. But for me, it really brought home the point that, we really need to take some time to reflect on how important it is, our life is, and how joyful and good it is.
Yeah, Ebony, and thank you so much for that, because exactly right. I mean, suicide, so important. Reconstitution of the cells of the perispirit. It completely went over my head. You got that. And that's the beauty of study group, that each one of us will see things from a different angle. And we can just talk for an hour about the reconstitution of the perispiritual cells after a bad decision such as suicide, and you can expand that not only suicide, alcoholism, drug abuse, sexolatry, and not only suicide. You can extend that to so many bad decisions that we make while incarnate, right? And there is one little big gigantic thing that you are able to capture, and me personally went right over my head.
Yeah, it's a very well put, Ebony. And I thought about discussing more in depth that part, but I said, if I start talking about suicide, and you can spend the whole class just talking about it. And there is so much here on this chapter that as Elmo said, I recommend everyone to reread the chapter and reflect on it. You can watch the class again, or I'll post on YouTube later. So, but yeah, so much here for us to learn. But our time is up. Thank you all for being here on this hot summer day. I hope you enjoyed. And next Sunday, which is the second Sunday of the month, we're going to go back to the book Jesus in the Home. And I think we are on we're going to start 24, 25, and 26, right now, which are 3 small chapters, but we will have a lot to discuss there. In terms of our schedule, we stopped for the month of July for summer vacations, the book club on Wednesdays, and both of Tuesdays study, Spiritism at noon, and the Spiritist group of Connecticut study at night. Our other fraternal assistants on Mondays we continue doing, and our Thursdays and Sunday studies, and the Saturday presentation of the the United States Spiritist Federation also continues. This Saturday is Marcia Trajano talking about thought and emotions, which is a very interesting subject. A new edition of the Spiritist Review, the number 20, is being published today. It will be available. It is already available if you want to take a look at it. It's on the International Spiritist Council website. If I'll copy the link here on the chat if anyone wants to grab it right now. Okay. This is the English version. Of course, there are in several different languages, but this is the English version. You can take the time while we are doing our final prayer to click on it and open and save it. And it's going to be on the email tomorrow also, of course. Okay, Carol, can you do our final prayer? Thanks.
Yes, certainly. Thank you very much, John. Thank you, Alma. Wonderful, wonderful class today. Thank you, Sarita, for reading for us today, and all who are here and participating. Infinite Creator and Divine Providence, we give thanks to be together again as brothers and sisters for our studies of the book Action and Reaction, Chapter 7, An Invaluable Discussion. The governor of life maintains the organizational account records of all actions, negative and positive karmas, which results in divine justice and universal law. We cannot escape this reality. There can be postponements, credits, and extraordinary resources for all incarnates and discarnates, both individually and collectively. Divine Providence provides love, wisdom, and assistance for all. However, we are responsible for our own actions, and we pray for discernment and a heartfelt willingness to transform our sentiments and to evolve. We have free will to loosen the grip of pride and selfishness. We are creating our future as the direct results of our conduct and thoughts in the present time, in this moment. We can modify ourselves and potentially our genetics and conscience. We are capable of readjustment, redemption, and regeneration. It is up to us to repair that which is registered in our memory and consciousness. Assistance is always available as we endeavor. We give thanks to the spiritual benefactors and the good spirits for inspiring us and guiding us today. May we receive the love, light, and peace of Christ within us, and for our loved ones, our teachers, our directors, our counselors, our mediums, our workers, and all participants. We pray for inner peace, and especially now for world peace and for those who are suffering in the physical and spiritual worlds. We pray for our center, SGNY, and all Spiritist centers throughout the world, that they may grow, prosper, expand, and be protected throughout the day and throughout the night. As we close, we humbly ask for safety and protection as we return to our family, friends, loved ones, and coworkers. May we go forth and remind ourselves to be beacons of love, of light, of peace, of service, and charity, which is love in action. May peace and love prevail. So be it.